You've done 100 things right. You showed up, you provided, you were present. You handled the hard conversations, made the sacrifices, carried the weight. And then you think of one thing you have not done yet, one ball you dropped, one area where you fell short. And suddenly, none of the rest of it counts. 100 good things you did vanish. The one thing fills the entire frame. You feel devastated, exposed, like the one gap has revealed the truth about who you really are, and everything else was just a mask you were wearing. Maybe it shows up with your children. You spent months being the father you wanted to be, and then you remembered something you promised to do and forgot. The thought lands in your chest like a verdict. I'm failing them. I'm not the father I thought I was. I am not enough. Maybe it shows up at work. You've built something meaningful, poured yourself into it, created real value. And then you notice one metric that's down, one piece of feedback that's missing, one sign that things are not moving the way you hoped. The thoughts land the same way. The whole thing is collapsing. I should give up. It was never going to work anyway. The collapse is instant and total, completely disproportionate to what's actually happened. And somewhere in the wreckage, a voice in your head is already cataloging all the other gaps, all the other ways you feel like you might be falling short, all the other evidence that confirms what you suspected all along. You were never good enough to begin with. If you recognize this pattern, you need to know where it is coming from, because what you're experiencing is an internal monitoring system that was installed under conditions of psychological coercive control. It's still running the program it was taught, long after the person who installed it is gone. This video marks a shift for this channel. So far, Stand Again has focused on two stages of the healing journey, which is education, where we name the tactics of abuse so you can recognize what's happening to you, and survival, where we cover strategies to get through the immediate crisis, things like grey rock and managing high conflict interactions. This particular video steps into the third stage, which is recovery. Recovery is where we address the patterns that are still running inside you long after the relationship has ended, the wiring that abuse installed, the programs that are still executing, even though the original threat is gone. The pattern we're exploring today, where one gap makes you feel like a total failure, doesn't have a single clinical name. It sits at the intersection of several well documented trauma responses, which is conditional self worth, all or nothing thinking, the traumatic inner critic, and the trauma driven perfectionism. What matters for our purposes today is understanding how this pattern was installed, why it persists after you leave the abusive partner, and how it can be retrained into something healthy. We'll start by examining the mechanism, how coercive control trains your nervous system to collapse into total failure whenever it encounters a gap or a mistake. Then we'll look at why logic and evidence do not fix this pattern, even though it seems like they should. And we'll close with the steps to begin retraining your system, drawing from the frameworks in my book, Reconnecting with Your Feelings After Abuse, which goes much deeper into this process. For those of you who are new here, this is Stand Again, a lived experience platform for male survivors of family violence. Abuse is not limited to one gender, but this channel focuses on the male perspective because it is so often dismissed or misunderstood. If this content helps you, please like, hype, subscribe, and add the word Stand Again into the chat. Those two words might just help a survivor of family violence find their words. And my apologies if I'm talking a little bit softer than I normally do in my other videos. My kids are fast asleep in the other room and I don't want to wake them. Let's get into the mechanism at play here. In coercive control, safety is conditional. You are never simply enough. You are enough if. Enough if you've done everything she expected. Enough if nothing is missing. Enough if there is no gap, no delay, no mistake, no unmet expectation anywhere in your life. The moment something is incomplete, you are no longer safe. That conditional structure is the foundation of everything that follows. The rule that gets trained into your nervous system is simple and total. Any unmet requirement equals global failure. It doesn't matter how much you've done, it doesn't matter how hard you've tried. The gap is what counts. The gap is what gets punished. And the punishment from your abuser teaches your brain a lesson it will never forget. Here's how that training works. When you missed something, anything, there were consequences in the abusive relationship. Missing one thing meant withdrawal affection. Missing one thing meant contempt. It meant criticism. Or you were met with unbridled rage. Missing one thing meant that everything you had done right was dismissed, reframed as performance, as manipulation, as the least you could do. Your efforts were erased. Only the gap or the mistake remained. And the gap was treated as evidence of who you really were underneath, proof that you were deficient, that you were failing, that you were never the man you pretended to be. That's what it's like within coercive control. Your brain is designed to learn from punishment. When a particular situation leads to pain, your brain logs that pattern and works to prevent it from happening again. So it developed an internal monitoring system, a scanner that runs constantly, searching for incompleteness, searching for mistakes, searching for gaps, searching for the thing that will be used against you by your abusive partner. The scanner's job was to find the problem before she did, to fix it before the punishment and the abuse arrived, to keep you safe by keeping you perfect. For men, this scanner integrates into something that was already there, which is competence as identity. Men are taught from boyhood that their value lies in what they can do, what they can provide, what they can deliver. Being capable, reliable, someone others can count on. These qualities are who he is, their identity itself. So when the scanner finds a gap, when it identifies an area of incompleteness or a mistake, the finding lands as you are not the man you thought you were. The gap becomes an identity wound. Every missed item becomes evidence that the competence he built his self worth on was always an illusion. The scanner was trained to search everywhere because punishment could come from anywhere. Within an abusive relationship, every domain of your life was subject to scrutiny. Your parenting, your work, your friendships, your health, your hobbies, your time management, your tone, your facial expressions, the way you stand. Any area could contain the gap or the mistake that could trigger abuse. So the scanner learned to search everywhere, all the time, across every aspect of your existence. The monitoring was never limited to one area, it was always total. There's another layer that makes this pattern particularly devastating for men who care deeply about their responsibilities. The scanner is powered by attention. It runs on whatever you're focused on, whatever matters to you. A man who didn't care about his children would not notice the things he hasn't done for them. A man who didn't care about his work wouldn't scan for signs of failure. The more something matters to him, the more intensely he monitors it. The more intensely he monitors it, the more gaps he finds. His dedication becomes his torture. His love for his children, his commitment to his work, his care for the people who depend on him, all of it becomes fuel for the scanner. The things he cares about most are the things that hurt him the most. The problem is that scanner does not stop running when the relationship ends. It was trained under threat, and it continues to operate as if the threat is still present. It still searches even for the smallest of mistakes. It still collapses the whole picture around you, whatever incompleteness it finds. It still treats any missing piece as evidence of total failure. The program is still running after the relationship ends. You're just running it on yourself now. This is what makes the pattern so disorientating. The voice pointing out your failures sounds like your voice. The criticism feels like it's coming from inside your own mind. But the logic of the criticism, the rule that says one mistake, one gap erases everything, that rule was installed by your abusive partner. You internalized her standards, you absorbed her method of evaluation, and now you enforce those standards on yourself automatically without any external prompting. She taught you how to be cruel to yourself, and the lesson stuck. There's also the question of worth and how it gets calculated. Under coercive control, your worth becomes metric based. It was measured externally. It depended on feedback, on performance, on outcomes. Neutral was never allowed. Silence wasn't safety. If there was no positive feedback, the absence itself became a threat under coercive control. Your nervous system learned to interpret any gap in external validation as evidence that something has gone wrong, that you have failed, that punishment and abuse is coming. So now, when you're doing meaningful work and there's a quiet day, when the positive validation pauses, your system does not read that as neutral. It reads it as danger. It reads it as proof that your work has failed, that you have failed, that the collapse you always feared is finally happening. Men are taught that tolerating discomfort is strength, pushing through is masculine, enduring is what good men do. So when this pattern is causing suffering, when the constant scanning and collapsing is exhausting him, when he is absolutely devastated by mistakes that rationally he knows are minor, he doesn't recognize it as a problem to be solved. He sees it as a test to be passed. He thinks enduring the internal assault is what strength looks like. He carries the weight silently because that's what he was taught good men do. He doesn't realize that the assault itself is the wound and that carrying it is survival, the kind of survival that slowly drains him. There's one more dimension in this mechanism that needs to be named. The pattern intensifies during your personal growth. When a man is doing meaningful work, when the stakes are high and the visibility is increasing, when he's building something that actually matters, the scanner does not quieten down, it gets louder. His nervous system interprets this matters as this can be used against me. Higher stakes mean more opportunities for failure, which means heightened vigilance, which means more gaps found, which means more collapse. So the moments when he's doing the most significant work of his life are often the moments when the internal critic is screaming the loudest. The pattern punishes him precisely for doing what matters. If you're trying to reason your way out of this pattern, you already know the result. You tell yourself the collapse is irrational. You point to the evidence of everything you have done right. You remind yourself that one mistake does not define a person. And the pattern keeps running anyway. The next time you find a gap or a mistake, the collapse happens again, just as total, just as devastating, as if you had never reasoned through it at all. The reason logic does not work is that the pattern does not live in the thinking part of the brain. It lives in the survival part, the amygdala, the region that processes threat and triggers fear responses, has been conditioned to treat incompleteness and mistakes as extreme danger. And the amygdala does not respond to an argument, it responds to felt experience. You can know intellectually that you're safe. Your amygdala does not care what you know, it cares what you feel. And it feels that the mistake or the gap is a threat, that punishment and abuse is coming, that you are in danger. No amount of rational analysis changes what the amygdala has learnt to feel. The pattern also lives in a procedural memory, the same kind of memory that stores how to ride a bike or drive a car. You don't think through those actions consciously. Your body just does them. The scanning and collapse operates the same way. It's automatic. It runs below the level of conscious thought. By the time you notice the collapse is happening, the pattern has already executed. Trying to reason with it afterwards is like trying to unfeel a reflex that's already fired. The logic comes too late. The damage is already done. There's a particular trap that men fall into here. because men are trained to trust reason over emotion. A man will often try to build a case against his own collapse. He gathers evidence, he constructs arguments, he tries to prove to himself that his feelings are wrong, that his reaction is unjustified, that he should feel differently than what he does. And this approach fails because the pattern isn't a belief that can be argued with. It's a conditioned response that was trained into the body. You cannot reason with conditioning. You can only retrain it. There's also what we might call the evidence trap. When a man tries to logic his way out of the collapse, he goes looking for proof that he's not a failure. But the scanning system, which is still running, immediately generates counter evidence. Every gap he notices feeds the prosecution. Every mistake and incomplete area becomes yet another data point for the other side. The more he engages with the pattern on logical terms, the more ammunition he ends up generating against himself. His strength, his capacity for analytical thinking, becomes his vulnerability here. The very tool he's using to fight the pattern is the tool the pattern uses back against him. The pattern will change when it is retrained at the level where it actually operates. That means working with the body, with the nervous system, with a felt sense of safety and threat. That means repeated experiences that teach the amygdala a different lesson, that shows it that incompleteness and mistakes do not lead to punishment, that safety does not require you to be perfect 100% of the time. Logic can help you understand the pattern, can help you see it clearly, can help you recognize what it's activating. The body is where you actually change it. My book, Reconnecting with Your Feelings After Abuse, walks through the full process of retraining emotional patterns that were installed under coercive control. What follows here is the essential framework, enough to understand the direction of the work and to begin practicing the key moves. If you find this framework useful, the book goes much deeper into each stage. The first step is recognition. Before you can change a pattern, you have to see it operating. This means learning to notice when the collapse is happening, to catch the moment when one gap or one mistake is being treated as though it is total failure. The practice is simple. When you feel the devastation beginning, when you feel yourself falling into the I'm failing at everything spiral, you name it. You say to yourself clearly, this is the total failure pattern activating. This is the old rule running. This is conditioning, not truth. Naming creates distance. You're no longer inside the collapse, debating whether you really are a failure. Instead, you're observing a conditioned response that was trained into you. You're watching the pattern rather than being consumed by it. Recognition matters because trauma loosens through awareness. When you can see the pattern as a pattern, it begins to lose its automatic grip. The second step is interruption. Once you've recognized the pattern activating, you need to break its momentum before it completes its cycle. The collapse wants to run to completion. It wants to spiral all the way down, gathering evidence, cataloging your failures, building the case for your total inadequacy. Interruption means stopping that momentum. The most effective interruptions work at the body level because that's where the pattern lives. A breath that drops deep into the belly, a physical change of your position, contact with something cold or textured, anything that shifts the physiological state and breaks the pattern's rhythm. You're teaching your nervous system that the collapse does not have to complete, that there is an exit before the bottom. The third step is replacement. After you've interrupted the pattern, you need to offer your nervous system something different to do. This is where you begin installing new rules to replace the ones that were trained in. One of the most powerful replacements is shifting from completion to continuity. The old rule said you had to be finished, had to have everything done perfectly, had to have no mistakes and no gaps. The new rule says, is this continuing? Are my children safe, loved, consistently cared for? Is my work moving forward, even if today is quiet? Continuity signals safety more effectively than completion ever could, because completion is impossible. There will always be more to do. Continuity can be true right now in this moment, regardless of what remains undone. Another crucial replacement is decoupling identity from metrics. The old rule welded them together. A gap or a mistake in performance meant a gap in who you were. The new rule separates them. You practice saying things like, a quiet day is a data point, not a verdict of my value. Or, parenthood is a relationship, not a checklist. Or, worth exists independent of completion. These statements are structural corrections. You're teaching your brain that the metric and the identity are separate things, that a gap in one does not mean a gap in the other, that your value as a person is not calculated by the same formula as your task list. The fourth step is reinforcement. New patterns do not stick after one practice, they require repetition. Every time you recognize a pattern and name it, you strengthen that recognition pathway. Every time you interrupt the collapse before it completes, you strengthen the interruption pathway. Every time you choose continuity over completion, you strengthen the replacement pathway. The old wiring was laid down through hundreds of repetitions, hundreds of moments where a gap or a mistake was punished by your abuser and the collapse was reinforced. Any new wiring requires its own repetition, its own accumulation of experiences that teach a different lesson. This takes time. There's no shortcut, but every repetition counts, even the imperfect ones, even the times where you caught it late, even the times when the collapse partly completed before you interrupted it. The fifth step is creating tolerance for neutral states. The old system could not tolerate neutrality. Silence in an abusive relationship meant danger. The absence of positive feedback or external validation meant something had or could go very wrong. You need to teach your nervous system that neutral is allowed, that nothing being wrong is a state you can rest in without collapsing into something being wrong. The practice here is deceptively simple. Once per day, usually in the evening, you make one statement. Nothing is wrong right now. You don't say everything is good because that invites argument. You don't say you've done enough because that triggers the scanner again. You just say nothing is wrong right now. And you let that be true. You let your body feel what it's like to be in a moment where nothing is wrong right now, where you don't have to perform or complete anything to be okay. For a nervous system trained under coercive control, this practice is profound. Finally, you need to expect the pattern to intensify during periods of growth, like we mentioned earlier. When you're doing meaningful work, when visibility is increasing, when the stakes are high, the old system will check whether it is still needed. The scanner will get louder, the collapses may come faster. This does not mean you're failing at the retraining. It means the pattern is doing exactly what it was designed to do, protecting you when things feel dangerous. When you expect this, when you know that growth will activate the pattern, you can meet the intensification with recognition rather than despair. You can say, this is happening because I'm doing something that matters. The stakes are high, so the scanner is loud. That's the pattern, not the truth. The pattern eventually quiets when it learns through repeated experience that is no longer required to keep you safe. If one small, insignificant mistake makes you feel like a total failure, if your hundreds of successes vanish when you find one area of incompleteness, if you carry an internal critic that speaks in your voice but uses your abuser's logic, you need to know what that is. It's a pattern that was installed under conditions of psychological threat. It was trained into your nervous system through repeated abuse and punishment, through the rule that any gap or any mistake meant you were not enough, through the collapse of everything good whenever something was missing. And it continues to run because that's what conditioned patterns do. They persist until they've been retrained. You are not deficient in effort. You are not deficient in care. You are not deficient in value or impact or worth. Your nervous system was taught to survive by never relaxing its grip, by scanning constantly for the gaps and mistakes that could be used against you, by collapsing into failure before the abuse arrived. That vigilance kept you safe once. It's exhausting you now, and it can be changed. What was trained can be retrained. The brain is not fixed. The patterns that were installed can be unwired and replaced with patterns that serve you rather than the person who installed them. It takes recognition, interruption, replacement, reinforcement, and tolerance for the discomfort of change. It takes time, it takes repetition, and it is possible. The monitoring system can learn new rules. The scanner can learn to rest. The collapse can stop being automatic. In healthy functioning, a gap and a mistake is just a gap and just a mistake. It's information about what might need attention. It does not erase everything else you have done. It does not reveal some hidden truth about who you really are. It does not mean punishment is coming. It's one piece of data in a much larger picture, and the picture holds. The picture includes everything you've built, everything you've given, everyone you've shown up for. The gap lives inside that larger context. It does not replace it. You are allowed to be incomplete and make mistakes and still be worthy. You are allowed to have gaps and still be a good father, a good man, someone who is doing meaningful work in the world. You are allowed to rest, even though there's more to do. The gap doesn't define you, it never did. That was her rule, not yours. And you can learn slowly and deliberately to stop enforcing her rules on yourself. If you want to go deeper into this retraining process, my book, Reconnecting with Your Feelings After Abuse, is available at standagain.com.au. It walks through how abuse hijacks your emotional processing and how to retrain it step by step. Thank you for bearing with me while I talk somewhat softly throughout this video. And as I always say, no matter how many times you've been knocked down, you can stand again. This is Stand Again, lived experience platform for male survivors of family violence. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Your voice might just help another man find his. If you're looking for one on one support, you can book coaching with a member of the Stand Again team. Simply visit standagain.com.au, where you will also find grounded information on surviving and recovering from family violence as a man. As always, remember that no matter how many times you've been knocked down, you can stand again.